Welcome back to the channel, and in this video we will be going over driving a classic vehicle over a modern sports car. Alright, so as you can see we have about 3 vehicles in front of the shop. 2 of them we will be driving today. The third one is just kind of a staple of the shop. It is a 1969 Fairlady ZS30. And with that, the first one we're going to be driving today is going to be the 1969 Salem Spectra Fastback. And the other one we're going to be driving today is going to be the 2018 Nissan 370Z Nismo. So you will notice with the Fairlady, we do have measured power of 914 and 4,300 RPM, measured torque of 1,254 foot-pounds of torque at 2,835 RPM. I did tune this vehicle, as you could see. The factory power and torque are different than the measured power. Tuning is at 81.65%. It does have aftermarket calipers as well as an aftermarket transmission, which I did adjust the ratios just a bit so we can get this thing up to 160 on those straightaways. Now with that, let's move over to the Nissan 370Z. And as you can see here, we do have a factory power and a factory torque, which does differentiate from the measured. I did do a little bit of modifications on this one, not to the extent I did on the Salem Spectra Fastback. Given the Salem has an aftermarket gearbox, I did not go that direction with this one. I just kept the gearbox stock. And obviously, you're not going to have any aftermarket carburetors on this one. But the measured power is at 650 horsepower with 7,555 RPM. Measured torque at 484 foot-pounds and 6,170 RPM. And a tuning of 69.55. You don't need much with the 370Z. Alright, so we are at the track now. Now, with this vehicle, since it does have such a high torque output, I generally never go full on. At least not until third gear, as if you do, you're going to run into the wall in the second gear, as it pulls very strongly to the right in second gear. Even a change to the gear ratios I don't believe would fix that. The engine's just too big. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so as you can see here, with these classic cars, what I like to do is just kind of go into the corners a little bit slowly at first in that first lap, and this will do for any vehicle actually, as you're trying to get a handle of the track. Even if you're used to it, that first lap with different vehicles is always different. But one thing you do want to pay attention to in particular with these older cars, especially these old muscle vehicles, is the rear end. Due to the fact that these older muscle vehicles did not come with a limited slip differential or traction control for that matter, the rear end tends to swing out a lot given they have rear wheel drive and such a great amount of horsepower in the back end of the vehicle. So that is something you do want to pay attention to more with these older vehicles than you might with the newer vehicles. As with the newer vehicles, they do have things to compensate for that, such as the limited slip differential in combination with the stability control and traction control. And when you're dealing with any high-powered vehicle, you also want to pay attention to how hard you're turning in those turns when you're going full out in those straight runs as well. As when you go full out with the full power of the vehicle, when you're talking like a vehicle with this kind of power, it's easy to make steering mistakes. I see, we're going full out there, so I just don't turn it at all. That's what happens when I take this full out. The brakes in this thing are actually aftermarket, being ventilated and all in the front. But one, these older vehicles do have usually have drum brakes in the rear. This was prior to the time where they started putting disc brakes all around, so it does limit the braking power a great deal. Now, if this was in real life, you could reconstruct the rear end to accept disc brakes, which would be ideal. But in this particular variant of Car Mechanic Simulator, that is not included, unfortunately. You see that? That's what I was referring to. It's that second gear, that'll catch you. He is too fast for her own good. I haven't yet taken it on the drag strip, but except for on one of my live episodes you might check out. Couldn't tell you which one, it was quite some time ago. But that would be in the description of the vehicle. It should be the only one there. Well, one of the few that I did a drag strip day. And with that, alright, so we got the 370Z here. And as you can see on that odometer to the right hand side, we do have traction control on this one. So what that means is it does control the sliding of the vehicle a bit. Personally, back when I was training to be pro in the racing simulators, Gran Turismo to be exact, I did not care for all of that. Quite honestly, one of my favorite vehicles was the 1998 Viper GTS. That was prior to when they came out with all this stability control, traction control, and everything else. I prefer to feel the vehicle. I think it could perform better on the track if you really become attuned to it. But if you are driving a different number of vehicles, like a different vehicle every week and multiple tracks, don't have time to get really attuned to it, then I could see the logic in that. But if you're asking me, the 1998 Skyline, that being the first of its class, well, class under the title Skyline, was one of the best vehicles ever made, and it didn't have any of that. And yet it drove like it did. So, with that, I will say with these newer vehicles, whether they're rear-wheel drive or front-wheel drive, this one actually being rear-wheel drive, and quite a bit more horsepower than the 350Z ever had. They don't swing out as much in the rear due to a lot of reasons I mentioned before, as well as newer parts. Kind of perfected the parts after a while when it comes to steering and suspension to a certain degree. If you look back at the older vehicles and you find the what is that? Ford GT. You will notice that with the Ford GT, it was one of the first models to include a lot of new features. That being, they were going to test it out against Ferrari in a race of the century, some may say of a decade in particular. But century is more appropriate for that race, given the names involved, and the improvement made to each of those vehicles in the process. Now, when we're talking about newer vehicles, some of them drive one way, others drive another. One of the reasons I'm actually driving the 370Z is because I, for one, really appreciate the engine response. Engine response on this vehicle, I mean, it's as close as you can get with a gas-powered vehicle, if you ask me, with the response of the torque immediately after going full on out of that first, second, third gear. I mean, with the power I put into it at over 600 horsepower, you'll still notice the power band in the fourth, no doubt, which is something. But the handling on it as well, just out of this world. I mean, you could drive other newer vehicles that weren't designed to the threshold that this one is designed, and you'll just feel it in the corners. I mean, some of those vehicles are just terrible in the corners. Not as bad as the classic vehicles. Classic vehicles are just horrendous in the corner. It's just a terrible example of how a vehicle should steer. But some of those newer vehicles make you question. Like the Porsche 911 series, for instance. Try taking that at the same speed as this is going in any of these corners and see how it performs. try comparing it to the Civic too. You can compare it to an older hatchback Civic or a newer Civic. Either one is probably going to be better than, we'll say, the 2015 to 2020 Porsche 911. The older ones are actually even worse. So there's that. But in a straight line, those things are amazing. It really adds more credit to what Will Smith did in the first Bad Boys, I believe it was. In the end, where he drove through the center of that wall, which is exactly what I would have done. Maybe not with someone else in the vehicle, but personally, exactly what I would have done. Now, if I had someone else in the vehicle, I would have notified them that they may want to jump out first, because I was about to do something stupid. But, that's just me. Now, with that, I think that will be a good conclusion to this road test of our classic vehicles compared to newer vehicles. And with that, I would like to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the like option on the bottom of the video. If you would like to see more of this content, please feel free to click subscribe. And don't forget to check out my live episodes, of which you can find a link to last week's episode in the upper right hand corner of this video, and every Friday between the hours of 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And as always, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day. I do have a little surprise at the end here you will want to stay tuned for.